Gunsmoke Rendezvous. The through freight hit Abbottsville at 8 o'clock on that soft spring evening, and when it slowed for the swing past the depot, Cole Abbott saw his chance to jump. He alighted rolling and arose looking even shabbier than before. A short, stocky young man in well-worn range clothes and a shapeless sombrero, there was little in his appearance to suggest he was heir to the vast acreage of Big Bill Abbott in this section or kin to that mammoth man for whom this town was named. Certainly, the two who witnessed Cole's arrival had neither recognition nor welcome in their eyes. One of them wore a sheriff's star, which did not sit well with Cole. Being jailed as a tramp in the town of his birth was no part of the carefully calculated scheme that had brought Cole Abbott home. 10 years had passed since Cole had seen Abbottsville, and those 10 years, changing him from 14 to 24, had made little difference in Sheriff Bill Johnson or Cyrus Lannister, the saloon owner. Both of them tall, wide-shouldered men, they were still as inseparable as ever, it seemed. Lannister wore black broadcloth as always, and Johnson had a calfskin vest that Cole remembered from the yesterdays. Their mouths were hard, and their hands hung low as they watched him brush the dirt from himself. Then Sheriff Johnson said, "Keep right on down the track, hobo. We don't cater to your kind in this town. Now, get. And I'll be watching until you're gone from sight." This surprised Cole. He had expected to be dragged off to jail, for in the old days Bill Johnson had always liked to keep his cells filled. The county made a meal allotment based on the number of prisoners, and Johnson, in the old days, had pocketed a nice profit by feeding his unwilling guests from restaurant scraps. However, Johnson was ordering him out of town instead, and that didn't fit Cole's scheme either. "To blazes with you, tin badge," he said and made his play. Cole packed no gun. He had wanted to make an inoffensive entry into Abbottsville, so he had come empty-handed, intending to get himself an iron later. Now he knew a moment of fleeting regret. But in the midst of that moment, he charged Bill Johnson, head down. Before the sheriff could reach his gun, Cole had rammed him hard in the midriff, and Johnson went down with the breath whooshing out of him. So far, Cole had had the advantage of surprise. Neither Johnson nor Lannister had expected anything but immediate obedience from an unarmed hobo. Now Lannister, with a throaty curse, was grabbing for a gun, but Cole, coming out of his crouch, brought his fist up, and his knuckles caught Lannister under the chin, sending him backward and sprawling over Johnson. Turning, Cole ran headlong for the corner of the depot, and he'd almost reached shelter when Lannister's gun blossomed against the gathering dusk. Cole felt the fire lance along his side, but it didn't slow him. Panting, he rounded the corner to reach comparative safety. Keeping the depot between himself and Lannister's gun, Cole darted over to the town proper, slipped between two buildings, and got to an alley behind Main Street. His side was sticky with blood, his heart pounded with exertion, but still, he ran, getting beyond the business district, which was mostly saloons, and coming at last to the rear of a little cottage near the far outskirts. He'd prowled this town as a boy, and memory had served him well. When he thundered on the cottage door, Doc McCall opened up for him. "You've got blood on you," Doc said with no surprise. "Come inside." He was a little man, McCall, bald and pink-jowled, with shoulders stooped from carrying a range's woes for 20 years. Cole followed the doctor into a comfortable, lamp-lighted living room and, crossing to the window, hauled down the shade. "Johnson and Lannister won't expect I dare show myself at a doctor's," he said. "But there's no use taking chances." McCall's voice sharpened. "Who are you, and what have you been up to?" he demanded. Cole faced him across the lamp. "Don't you know me, Doc? Shucks, you brought me into this world, and got only half your fee for doing it." It was the last that brought the light to McCall's eyes, but before the medico could speak, a blonde-haired girl stood framed in the doorway. "I know him," she announced. "Even with those whiskers. Welcome home, Cole." Cole grinned. "Hello, Rose," he said. "You turned out to be an eyeful of a woman." "Cole," exclaimed Doc McCall. "Cole Abbott. And you're wounded. A ruckus with the sheriff, did you say? Rose, my kid." His daughter fetched his bag for him, and then, apparently used to such emergencies, went into the kitchen for hot water and towels. Doc cut Cole's shirt away, exposing the bloody furrow Lannister's bullet had plowed. When Rose appeared with water, Doc methodically swabbed away. "I wouldn't have known you," he said as he worked. "Let's see, you must be 5'8" or 9 now, and you'd tip the scales at about 160, and none of it's fat." "Yes, sir, you've grown up, boy." Bitterness shadowed Cole's eyes. "But not enough to get you the rest of your fee." Doc's face softened. "That's rankled you, eh, son?" he said. "It's been a joke to some, that story of how Big Bill Abbott looked at you the day you were born, then wrote me a check for half my fee, saying that since I'd brought him only half a man, I was to get only half my money. Yet you're big enough by most standards. The Abbotts happen to run 6'3" and 4. Your mother was small-boned and dark like you, Cole. And she was the only thing Big Bill ever really loved, her and his Triangle Ranch. Her dying the day you were born, son, didn't lessen Bill's bitterness any." Cole winced, and not from the sting of iodine. "But I've tried to be his kind of man," he said. "He sent me east for schooling when I was 14. I didn't come home for the summers. Instead, I worked on ranches, aiming to show Dad it didn't take height to handle a rope, a branding iron, or a gun. I've seen every state on the sunset side of the Mississippi, yet when Dad decided to retire a year ago to go and squat in Helena, he put Curtis Abbott, a shirt-tail cousin, in charge of the Triangle here. Curtis, it seems, measures up to the Abbott standards, in pounds and inches." "You've seen your dad lately, son?" "Not since I finished school, 5 years ago," answered Cole. "I'll go to him when he sends for me, or when I've proved myself man-size. I'm still working for a bitter root spread. I wouldn't even have known about Cousin Curtis being in charge here if I hadn't swapped a letter with you once in a while, Doc." "Your dad's more stubborn than hard," McCall told him. "He started out intending to dislike you. He likely changed his mind long ago, but it would take a miner's drill to get the truth out of him. Remember that, son." Rose, across the room, had been a silent listener. Now she said, "If you've come here to make trouble for Curtis Abbott, think twice, Cole. Curtis has got as many faults as most of us, and one of them is a fondness for the pasteboards at Cyrus Lannister's saloon. But you can't blame him for taking the Triangle managership when it was offered him." "That's right," Duck said. "You haven't told us what fetched you here, Cole." "Hellcat Joe Holloway fetched me," Cole said. Duck almost dropped the bandage he was fashioning. "Holloway?" he echoed. "What do you aim to do about Holloway?" "Hellcat was foreman of the Triangle all the time my dad was the big boss," Cole said. "Yempa taught me to ride before I could walk. He was more of a father to me than Big Bill ever was. If I owe anything to any man in the world, I owe it to Hellcat Joe. One of your letters said that Hellcat quit when Curtis Abbott took over. And your last letter said Yempa had gone bronc and had taken to rustling Triangle stock. That's what brought me here." "You don't believe Hellcat guilty?" "Look," said Cole. "If I told you I'd seen a cow climb a tree to suck birds' eggs, you'd think I'd been tipping the jug. It isn't the nature of a cow to climb trees. And it isn't the nature of Hellcat to turn outlaw. I can savvy him quitting in disgust when Cousin Curtis took over. I can even savvy Yempa getting his nose wet and making some mighty noisy saloon talk about what he thought of the Triangle. But he wouldn't mean it. Yempa's a cowpoke, by grab, and a cowpoke stays loyal to his spread. I know Yempa, Doc." "When you get this basin moved, Rose, fetch Cole one of my shirts," McCall said quietly. "It should about fit him if he doesn't try buttoning the collar. His own is a mess." Worming into the shirt, Cole said, "Can't you see it, Doc? Somebody else is doing the rustling and hanging it onto Hellcat. And I've come here to find out who and tack his hide on the wall. The freight train fetched me in tonight. I figured it best not to show up as Cole Abbott. That might be a warning to whoever's using Yempa's name. I'd figured on seeing you and Rose, anyway, and I'm counting on you to keep quiet. Johnson and Cyrus Lannister were at the depot when I lighted. Johnson ordered me out of town, not recognizing me, and we had a little ruckus. And Lannister creased me with a bullet." "Look, son," Duck said. "It's a mighty fine thing that fetched you here. But you're butting your head against a wall. Hellcat's taken to doing more than rustling. He's gone completely bronc. Twice lately he's stopped the stage that comes down from Helena and meets the railroad here. He's worn a slicker and mask, but both times his dappled horse was recognized." "Anybody might be using Yempa's horse," Cole argued. "Bill Johnson nailed Yempa and put him in jail a couple of weeks ago," Doc went on. "Before the day of his trial, Hellcat pried the bars out of his cell window. He would have stood a fair chance at a trial here, Cole. The old coot was well liked in the past. But he busted jail instead. Now don't try telling me it was because he saw the cards stacked. No Abbottsville jury would have branded him guilty on purely circumstantial evidence. Yempa knew that. He brought in his own verdict against himself when he skipped jail." "I'll see Hellcat holding up a stage before I believe it," Cole said stubbornly. "And even then I'll not be sure." Doc shook his bald head. "Likely you won't have that chance, son. I told you Yempa stopped the stage twice. The second time was just the other night. And that time he threw some lead. The stage driver is over at young Doc Benson's place, fighting for his life. Benson called me in on the case, and I'd say that the driver will be dead before another sunrise. See what that will mean. Cole? The whole range will be out beating the brush for Yempa now that he's got blood on his hands. It was a stunning blow to Cole. This latest bit of information, for now he saw that the job he'd taken on was even bigger than it had seemed at first. Was there now a crack in the foundation of his faith in Hellcat Joe Holloway? While Cole tried to collect his thoughts, a heavy step on the front porch took Rose to the window. "Sheriff Johnson," she whispered after a quick peek behind the shade. "Lannister must have known he wounded you, Cole, and Johnson is making a checkup of the doctors. Dad, get Cole's old shirt out of and you, Cole, use the back." "Thanks," Cole whispered. "Thanks for everything." Outside, deep darkness had gathered over the town, and Cole Abbott kept to cover as he slipped down the alleyway behind the McCall cottage. He had escaped Sheriff Johnson once again, and he knew that Doc and Rose would keep the lawman occupied long enough for him, Cole, to be well away. But he wished now that he had had more time for talking. Hellcat Joe Holloway had turned himself into an outlaw for sure. Hellcat had kicked the lid sky high and let the merry blue blazes come bubbling out. That was the size of it, yet nothing was changed for Cole. He had come here to square Yempa with the law, and he would. But as he strode aimlessly along, he wondered just where he'd cut sign on Hellcat. He had wanted to ask the McCalls a lot of questions about that, but Sheriff Johnson had had to show up. Saloon talk might give him some of the answers, and Cyrus Lannister's Ace High was the biggest drinking place. Cole carefully weighed the risks. No danger of his being recognized as Big Bill Abbott's son, he decided. Not unless he ran into Curtis, who had seen him in recent years. Doc McCall hadn't known him, and neither had Bill Johnson or Cyrus Lannister, at the depot. Rose's recognition had probably been prompted by his words to her father. No, there wasn't much chance of a down at the heels cowpoke being taken for Bill Abbott's heir. The real risk, then, lay in being recognized as the hobo who had assaulted the majesty of Abbottsville's law and laid his fist on Cyrus Lannister as well. But only two men could recognize him in that role, and Cole could be careful to avoid Johnson and Lannister. And those two had probably pegged him as a hobo who'd gotten full of canned heat courage, made a wild play, and was now rabbiting it across the prairie. So thinking, Cole made his decision, and it fetched him around to the boardwalks where he strode along with a wary eye. The hitch rails were crowded tonight, and that meant a lot of cowboys were in from outlying ranches. Some of the mounts before the Ace High bore his father's triangular brand, but Cole brushed boldly through the batwings. The place was packed, stale tobacco smoke slowly eddied below the hanging lamps, and the talk of many men blended into a meaningless hum, while a seedy piano player tried to make his music heard above the noise. Cyrus Lannister was here, a purple bruise on his pointed chin where Cole's fist had marked him. The Ace High owner, watching a three-sided poker game at one of the far tables, was too engrossed to give Cole much worry. But one of the players at that table was Curtis Abbott. Though it was several years since he had seen him, Cole knew his distant kinsman instantly. Curtis had the big body of the Abbotts, but his face, florid and bluffly handsome, held none of the strength of Big Bill's. Curtis had his eyes on the cards and was apparently sweating out a series of poor hands, so Cole put down his first impulse to leave the place. According to an old saying, the best place for a man to hide himself is in a crowd, and the crowd was here, spurred cowboys from the ranches, booted miners from the hills that lay between here and Helena, and a scattering of townspeople as well. Buying a drink, Cole moved to the far end of the bar and kept his back to the crowded room. In this manner, he placed himself within a long jump of the saloon's seldom-used back door, and his strategy was foreplanned in case he found himself in a tight. His first half-hour was fruitless. He toyed with his drink so long that he wrung glances from the barkeep, whereupon Cole downed the stuff and ordered another drink, which he eventually dumped into the sawdust because he needed a clear head. Listening to the talk of those closest to him, he learned nothing of interest until a newcomer shouldered to the bar. This fellow had a quick drink, then announced, "Farnishaw just cashed in his chips over at Doc Benson's. That little old stage driver is a gosling." Out of the mutter of anger that arose, Cole heard somebody say, "We ought to get up a rope party and comb those Tularul hills. Time was when I split my tobacco with Hellcat Joe Holloway, but he's turned wolf for keeps." There was more of this, and Cole, listening, had a vivid ghastly picture of Yempa kicking out his life at a rope's end. But at least he'd learned that Hellcat haunted the Tularul hills that lay to the north of the Triangle acreage, and that gave him a place to begin his hunt. He took a step away from the bar, noticing that Curtis Abbott was still deeply intent upon his game and that Cyrus Lannister was watching the play, and at that moment the rear door eased open and a boy slid stealthily into the bar room. At least Cole judged that it was a boy, for it was a slight figure clad in Levi's and a shirt and with a sombrero as shapeless as his own. But there was a fullness to the bust that couldn't be concealed, even by an oversized shirt, and it hit Cole suddenly that this newcomer was a girl in disguise. She was glancing quickly to right and left, and now she edged toward the rear stairs that led upward to a series of rooms above. This maneuver put her, for a moment, in the full light of an overhanging lamp, and now Cole was electrified to alert attention, for the girl was Rose McCall. Cole went up the stairs after her. He didn't take time for a decision, he only knew that desperation alone could drive the girl into a place like the Ace High, and that meant she was risking trouble and might need help. The same sense of loyalty to an old friendship that had motivated her to give him warning that Bill Johnson was on the McCall porch was now prompting him to follow her, and he reached the head of the stairs just as she vanished into Cyrus Lannister's private office, closing the door behind her. Pausing here, Cole glanced downstairs. Apparently, nobody had noticed the two make the ascent. The barkeep was busy at his work, and Lannister was still watching Curtis Abbott's table. Easing to the office door, Cole put his hand on the knob and took several seconds turning it. Then he quickly lunged into the room. There was a lot of fancy furniture here, and a massive desk centered the room, a lamp burning brightly above it. Rose stood behind the desk, obviously caught in the act of going through the drawers as Cole entered. Her hand fluttered to her throat as he closed the door, but recognition washed the fear from her eyes. "You," she murmured. "Lucky it wasn't Cyrus Lannister. What are you looking for?" Her answer was irrelevant. "Sheriff Johnson wasn't looking for you tonight. He came to the cottage to get Dad to come over to Doc Benson's. The stage driver was dying, and Benson wanted help." "What are you looking for?" Cole insisted. "These," she said reluctantly and pulled a sheaf of papers from the drawer. "That's the trouble with a man Lannister's size, he gets careless. These are IOUs signed by Curtis Abbott to take care of gambling debts he's run up here." Back at the cottage, Rose had mentioned that Curtis had a fondness for the pasteboards in Cyrus Lannister's place, and she'd asked Cole not to be too harsh if he had come to deal with his big cousin. All of that fitted, but it still left Cole astonished to find what had fetched Rose here. There was only one explanation that he could see, and he said thinly, "As I recall it, Curtis always had a way with the ladies." Anger put a high flush to Rose's face. She picked up a box of matches from the desk and struck one, lighting the papers which she held over the wastebasket. "Do you think I've lived all my life in this town without learning that Cyrus Lannister's wheels are fixed and his decks marked?" she asked as the papers quickly turned to ashes. "Curtis is a newcomer here. Obviously, he's gotten in deep. He just the same as admitted that to me when he came calling not long ago. I wanted to help him, yes. And this is the only way I could think of. Lannister won't dare to try holding him to those IOUs now that they're destroyed. And perhaps Curtis will have learned his lesson." It came to Cole then that this was a brave, unselfish thing she was doing, and he knew that he was angry only because she was doing it for Curtis. It wasn't Rose who had fetched Cole back to the town of his birth, yet he realized that the memory of her had been with him all of the years. And this made twice now that Curtis Abbott had unwittingly beat him out. But while he was thinking, part of him remained sentinel, and now he stiffened. "Someone climbing the stairs," he whispered. "Quick! They'll have us trapped for sure if they're coming into this office." There was one window, to the rear of the room. Cole reached it in 3 long strides, hoisted the sash and had a look out. Below was the blackness of the alleyway, but there was a shed of sorts directly beneath the window. It was, Cole realized, a sort of housing covering the rear doorway of the saloon, but it was a mighty long drop to the roof of that shed. Rose was at his elbow, and he could hear voices just beyond the office door. Cyrus Lannister's, he judged, yes, and Sheriff Bill Johnson. "Out you go," Cole urged, and he got Rose over the sill and lowered her by her wrists as far as he could reach. He let go then, she dropped, to land cat-like on the shed roof, and from there it was an easy jump to the ground. Cole had his own leg over the sill as the door opened, but he'd wasted a few seconds too many helping Rose get away. Lannister's eyes lifted from the rifle desk to Cole, the saloon owner's hand going to his gun. Johnson, crowding behind Lannister, made the same play, shouting, "Up with him, you!" It was obey or die, and when Cole turned, his hands hoisted, the sheriff's eyes widened. "Our hobo friend again, eh?" he ejaculated. "A wild one, Cyrus. First he assaults an officer of the law, then he tries his hand at robbery. Better learn to lock your office when you leave it empty." Lannister's eyes narrowed. "Guess you'll have to take him to the jail, Bill," he said. "Search him when you get him there, and I'll have a look to see what's missing, meanwhile." "Come along, you," Johnson ordered with a flourish of his gun. Again, there was no choice but for Cole to obey. But bitterness scalded through him as he moved across the office and out of it under the sheriff's watchful eye. There'd be no scouring the Toolaroo Hills for Hassayampa Joe by Cole Abbott, not when he was going to be locked up in the town's calaboose. A fine start he'd made on the mission that had fetched him here. In Abbottsville's jail stood midway of the street, a long, low structure situated where the town's business section ended and the residential section began. Prodded through the crowd at Ace High and along the boardwalk by Sheriff Johnson, Cole was marched into the sheriff's office to the front of the building, searched, and then ushered into the cell corridor where he found all the cells vacant. This surprised Cole, just as it had surprised him to have Bill Johnson order him out of town instead of jailing him when he'd first arrived. "Looks like we caught you before you had time to fish anything of value out of Cyrus's desk, hobo," Johnson said, locking Cole in a cell. "But that won't get you off any easier." The sheriff left the building almost immediately, and Cole began pacing his cell. He had to get out of here, and mighty soon, for very shortly the aroused range was going to start scouring the Toolaroo's with a hang rope, and he had to reach Hassayampa Joe Holloway first. That reminded him that Yempa had escaped from the same jail, but when Cole tested the bars of his window, he found them solidly set. Not a chance there. He fell to wondering about Rose. She had made good her escape from the Ace High, and obviously neither Johnson nor Lannister had suspected that a second person had been in the saloon office. No, Rose was in the clear, and, strangely, Cole Abbott drew satisfaction from the thought, feeling no rancor because it was Rose and her activities on behalf of Curtis Abbott that had gotten him into this jam. And thinking about Rose, he suddenly found her here, in the shadowy cell corridor, Johnson keys in her hand. "Here," she said, thrusting the keys through the barred door to him. Johnson left them in his desk. "Guess he didn't figure anybody would be apt to try freeing an aimless hobo. I don't know which one fits this cell. Try them until you find the right one, and I'll keep watch outside, meanwhile. If I whistle, you'll know Johnson is coming back." She was gone as silently as she'd come, and Cole blessed her name as he fumbled with the keys. The first three were of no use to him, the fourth opened the cell door. He hurried up the corridor, clutching the keys, and he had almost reached the sheriff's office when he tripped and went sprawling. Picking himself up, he rubbed his bruised knees, and then felt to see what object had tripped him. A trapdoor was set here in the floor of the cell corridor, a trapdoor leading to a cellar beneath the building, and it was equipped with a hand ring set into a depression that made the ring flush with the floor. But a hasp-and padlock had been added, keeping the trapdoor firmly locked, and it was this contrivance that had spilled Cole. Sheriff Johnson had skirted the trapdoor when he'd herded Cole along this same corridor earlier that night. "Fine place for a padlock," Cole muttered angrily. And then he was gripped by great curiosity and a nebulous suspicion. He'd been in this jail as a boy. He'd come here with Big Bill Abbott when his father had business with the law. He'd seen this same trapdoor yawning open in those bygone days, and he'd been told that it led to a dark cellar into which refractory prisoners were put for solitary confinement. With a boy's practicality, he'd wanted to know what kept such prisoners confined, since there was no lock on the door. "Sheriff hauls out the ladder after he puts a man down there," his father had explained gruffly. "No lock needed since an hombre can't climb out." But now there was a lock. Why? Was there a prisoner against whom extra precautions had to be taken? Cole felt along the key ring, felt until he found the only small key, and when he inserted it into the padlock, the device flew open. Hauling at the trapdoor, Cole peered down into the black depth. "About time you were fetching supper," a voice bellowed from below. "Ain't it enough, keeping a man penned up in the dark like he was a blasted gopher, without starving him, too?" There followed a long litany of profanity that was almost beautiful in its thoroughness. It bespoke a rough life and a lurid tongue, and a fine art developed through the years. There was only one man on this range who could cuss like that, Cole knew. "Hellcat," Cole called joyfully. "Eh? You ain't the sheriff? Here, can you grab hold of my hand? It's me, Cole Abbott." Fingers closed over fingers, Cole hauled hard, and the head and shoulders of Hellcat Joe Holloway appeared dimly above the floor, and then the oldster was in the corridor. "Cole," he cried, seeking the younger man's hand in the darkness and pumping it heartily. "You're a sight for sore eyes, even if I can hardly see you. Say, you filled out mighty nice. Here to side your old part? Right?" "Right," Cole answered. Pure luck put me on the trail, pure luck and remembering that this trapdoor never used to be locked. A lot of things are clear now. You're supposed to have escaped from this jail. I ain't been doing those things they've tacked onto my name, Hellcat protested. I got considerably riled when Big Bill put your cousin Curtis in as manager of the ranch, and I did some saloon talking, Cole, but I've never bothered the triangle none. Somebody stole that dappled horse of mine and has been using it. They're still using it, and the sign says that the sheriff and probably that sidekick of his, Cyrus Lannister, have been putting the Owl Hoot brand on you, Cole informed him. They locked you up below, made it look like you'd escaped, and that really put you in a bad light. Then, with you under lock and key, they've kept using your horse. You were slated to be a Gon Gosling, Yampa, or so I'd guess. Once this game played itself out, they likely aimed to take you out somewhere, put a bullet in you, and then come dragging your carcass home to prove they'd laid you by the heels. It was mighty slick figuring. Now I savvy why the sheriff's been keeping his jail empty. He didn't want anybody around who might hear you and start wondering if you made a ruckus down below. Hellcat growled deep in his throat. Lead medicine will cure those too. It won't be as simple as that, Cole said. Once I take you out of here, you become just exactly what the town figures you to be, an escaped prisoner. We've got to lay a trap for that pair that will show up this scheme of theirs. But the first thing is to get out of this building. Outside, Rose whistled softly, urgently. The sheriff, Cole whispered, and flattened himself against the nearest cell door. He's coming back. Quiet, Yampa. Grasping the keyring tighter, for it was the only weapon he had, Cole waited tensely. It would never do for the pair of them to be discovered now, and there wasn't time for Yampa to get back into the cellar and Cole into his cell, not when boots were slogging up the steps leading into the building. The door that separated the cell corridor from the office was slightly ajar, and Cole saw the light beyond brighten as someone turned up the lamp that had been left burning on the desk. Two men had entered, and one of them, Cyrus Lannister, said, I wanted to get you out of the Ace High and away from Curtis Abbott to do our talking, and this place is as good as any. What do you think of what Curtis had to say? You're sure Curtis is right? This from Bill Johnson. He saw that hobo when you herded him through the Ace High, Lannister observed. He had a good look at him, and Curtis and Cole Abbott are some sort of distant cousins. Sure, he's right if he says your hobo is Cole Abbott. At least he's so positive that he's considerably worried. Big Bill Abbott and his son never cared much for each other. Bill held it against the kid because Cole wasn't man-sized. But just the same, Curtis is afraid that Big Bill has sent Cole here to check on him. Cole was pretty fond of Hellcat Joe Holloway when Cole was a kid, Cyrus. Used to follow Yampa around like a shadow. Supposing Cole's here because he heard that Hellcat was in trouble? Have you thought of that? Beside Cole, Hellcat was stiffening with anger. Cole put a restraining hand upon Yampa's arm. Beyond the door, Lannister was evidently doing some heavy thinking, for there was a moment of silence. Then. No, it's Curtis that fetched Cole Abbott here. He must have come in on a freight so he could work undercover. But remember that we caught him in my office. Only one thing was missing from my desk, Bill. Those IOUs I've held against Curtis. I found some ashes and charred papers in my wastebasket. My guess is that Cole Abbott heard that Curtis had been playing into our hands, and Cole came here to get Curtis out of a tight. Cole likely has no reason to love Curtis, but he's an Abbott, and he'd want to spike anything that might mean harm to the Triangle A. The sheriff said, all I know is that we've got Cole Abbott locked up, Hellcat Holloway on ice, and Curtis Abbott excited enough to kick over the apple cart. Things could shape to a showdown mighty fast. What's next? Another moment of silence. It took a fixed deck to get Curtis lined up with us at first, but he's just as crooked as we are, Lannister said. We've rustled Triangle a stock and hung the blame on Hellcat, and that was Curtis' own idea. But Curtis is yellow, and he'd sell us out if it meant saving his own skin. Our chore is to get him in so deep we'll have him over a barrel for keeps. So far, me and you have taken turns riding Hellcat's dappled horse and wearing a mask and slicker. But Curtis is big enough to play the part, too. And tonight he's going to do it. We'll tell him it's time he took the same chances we've been taking. Do you see what I've got schemed, Bill? We'll head up into the Tula Rules and stop that southbound stagecoach that hits Abbottsville tomorrow morning. And Curtis will do the stopping. But when Curtis sees who's aboard he'll turn to water. We'll be back in the bushes, out of sight but handy enough to give Curtis some Dutch courage, Lannister said. When the stage is stopped, one of us will plant a bullet in the passenger. See what it will mean? Curtis will be neck deep in that killing, even if he doesn't throw the lead. and we'll have him where we want him from there on out. In fact, there'll be no further need of trading on Hellcat's name, so we'll give old Yempa his needings and Abbottsville's brave sheriff will have the glory of putting an end to the outlaw scare. Cole Abbott can get shot trying to escape. How are we to know that the hobo who hit town was Big Bill's son? And that will make Curtis the sole heir to the triangle, eh? It's just about perfect, Johnson decided. This rustling and stagecoach stopping has been penny ante, but tonight's deal should put the real stake in our laps, the triangle, eh? The lamplight dimmed beyond the doorway as the wick was turned down. We'd better be hitting the trail fast if we're going to get up into the Tularoos in time to stop that stage. Curtis will likely still be at the Ace High, and we can switch him over to Hellcat's dappled horse on the way north. The outer door opened as the two prepared to depart, and Johnson said then, "Just one more thing, Cyrus. Are you plumb sure that Curtis didn't see the telegram or get any other kind of message?" "Not a chance," Lannister assured him. "Curtis was deep in a game at my place the night that kid telegraph operator came in with the message. I took the wire and told the kid I'd deliver it to Curtis between hands. That wire is still in my pocket. And if Curtis had gotten any other kind of message, would have heard about it. He'd be a heap more worried than he is over finding Cole Abbott in town." "Good," Bill Johnson said. "No, Curtis hasn't got the faintest notion that Big Bill Abbott is due here by tomorrow morning's stage to pay him a visit," Lannister added as they closed the door behind them. "And Curtis will be even more surprised when Big Bill steps out of that stage in the Tularoos to stop a bullet. The triangle A is as good as ours, Bill." 4. Many times since he'd returned to Abbottsville, Cole had wished that he'd fetched a gun along, but his need was never so acute as at this moment when Sheriff Bill Johnson and Cyrus Lannister made their departure from the jail building. For now Cole knew the full extent of their devilish scheming, seeing the shape of it crystal clear, and he knew that he had to stop them. Big Bill Abbott was coming in on the stage that would be threading through the Tularul Hills tonight. Big Bill Abbott was slated to be bushwhacked, and when he died, Lannister and Johnson stood to take over the triangle, for they'd already enmeshed Curtis Abbott in their net and would tangle him deeper before the sun rose. Then there was Hellcat Joe Holloway, who was to have been the scapegoat when the sign was right. Hasayampa would soon be safely out of this building, but another man stood in danger now, and that man was Cole Abbott's father. Thus a last char remained for Cole, and he went quickly to the sheriff's desk and began pawing through it in search of a gun. He didn't take time to think that he and his father had been estranged all of his life. He remembered instead that Doc McCall had argued that Bill Abbott had long ago given up his foolish dislike for his son but was too stubborn to admit it. And now that Cole stopped to reflect, he hadn't given Big Bill much of a chance in recent years to show where his heart lay. He'd kept out of the old man's life, and maybe Bill hadn't understood why that had been. Maybe that was why Bill had chosen Curtis Abbott for the managership of the Triangle. And so, with Big Bill Abbott's life in danger, Cole suddenly saw his father with greater clarity than ever before, but all the while his fingers were feverishly busy at the desk, and he finally found a drawer with guns that had probably been taken from drunken cowpokes who had never called for them. Helping himself to one and making sure it was loaded, Cole passed another to Hellcat. Then they were hurrying out of the jail building, and Rose came from around a corner to dart toward them. "Hellcat," she cried in astonished recognition. "Yes," Cole said grimly. "He's been a prisoner all the time, down in the cellar." Johnson only made it look like Joe had escaped. "That should tell you all you need to know. There isn't much time for talking. Where can we find fast horses?" "What is it?" Rose said. "Where are you going?" But Cole had to remember that Curtis Abbott would also be at the end of that trail, the man for whom Rose had dared to rob Cyrus Lannister's office. "I'm mighty beholden to you for the sheriff's keys," he told her. "But you can't ride this trail with me, girl. There'll be a bullet sure at the end of it." "Hitch rails are crowded," Hasayampa observed. "We'll either have to turn horse thief or lose a lot of time." "That's right," Cole agreed and crossed over to the nearest saloon. Running a judicious eye over the racked saddlers, he picked one that looked long on speed and bottom and swung to the saddle just as Yempa, making a like choice, arose. Rose was at Cole's elbow, clamorous with questions, but now a knot of cowpokes had barged out of the saloon's batwings, and one sent up a wild shout. "Hellcat Holloway," he cried. "Stealing a horse right here in town." Rose must have sensed what was coming, for she suddenly flung herself to one side. Cole was jerking at the tie rope, and Hellcat had already freed his mount. The two wheeled their stolen saddlers as the powder began to burn. Those cowpokes were sober enough to remember that the streets were thronged tonight, and that was the fugitive's salvation. With bullets pelting about them, they went roaring up the street until Cole angled between two buildings and up an inky alleyway, Hellcat hard after him. Had a look at the Ace High's hit trail as we passed it, Yempa shouted. I know Lannister's private saddler and Johnson and Curtis Abbott's when I see 'em. None of 'em there. While we was hunting us guns and palavering with the girl, they made time. And we're going to have half the town at our heels, Cole said grimly. You've had a murder pinned on you as of earlier tonight, old-timer. A stage driver who stopped Al Hoot lead. We'd better get for cover. To the north of Abbottsville, a wooden bridge spanned a turbulent creek that cut from west to east, and as they neared it, Cole spilled from his saddle and dragged his horse beneath the wooden span. Hasayampa followed his example, and the two stood knee-deep in water, their hands tied over the horse's nostrils, and they were this way when the planking rumbled above them as irate townsmen took the trail. They'll find we've fooled them, Cole whispered. But maybe they'll run themselves in circles before they do. They waited a few more minutes to make sure that a second posse wasn't following, and those minutes fired Cole with impatience, for they were putting Cyrus Lannister and Bill Johnson and Curtis Abbott that much farther ahead. But the trio would have to stop somewhere to get Hellcat's dappled horse, which they apparently kept hidden out in the broken country to the north. When Cole and Hellcat finally came cautiously across the bridge, they found themselves unchallenged, and Cole pressed hard after that. A moon was just beginning to show itself over the eastern hills, and it climbed steadily as the next few hours brought the massive Tularules looming closer and closer. Somewhere in the vastness of the night were the three who were riding to do murder, and somewhere, too, was the posse that sought Hasayampa and Cole. Death ahead of them, and death to dog their heels, but always Cole was remembering that stagecoach that was wending down out of the north, the stagecoach and its passenger who was coming unsuspectingly to a Gunsmoke Rendezvous. There was no knowing just where Curtis Abbott, in the guise of Hasayampa Holloway, would strike at the stage. Finding the stage road, the fugitives could only parallel it, hoping to come upon the three they sought. But Cole, his mind racing ahead, saw the shape of a new plan. You remember this country better than I do, Yempa, he said. The road circles down out of the hills, I know, but is there any way I can cut over land and meet the stage? I'd like to be aboard it when it's stopped. Hellcat pointed due north. See yonder ridge that's humped like a horse taking the morning kinks out of himself? Climb up that and drop down the other side, and you'll hit the road which has to make a wide circle to save itself that climb. But you'll have to go it alone, boy. This horse has gone lame on me. So intent had Cole been on the trail ahead that he hadn't noticed that Hellcat had lately been hard put to keep up with him. You keep paralleling the road, old-timer, he said. I'll take the shortcut. Between us, we'll maybe get our friends sewed up and vent that owl hoot brand they've put on you. Then Cole was urging his mount up the ridge, climbing through timber that thinned as he made his ascent. Thankful for the full moonlight that now drenched the land, he reached the crest at long last to look down upon silvered pine tops below him. Now he began descending, and that was even riskier than climbing, but at last, he came into the black chaos of the pine and through it to where the road ran silver bright in the moonlight. No sign of the stage. Fearful that he'd planned in vain, Cole walked his horse, heading south along the road. If the stage were behind him, it would overtake him before long. If it were ahead, then the play was up to Hellcat. So Cole reasoned, and was hard put to restrain himself from lifting the jaded mount to a gallop as anxiety ate at him. And then, borne on the night breeze, came the jingle of harness chains, the creak of thorough braces, the drumbeat of 24 hoofs. Cole was sitting his saddle there in the moonlight when the stage rounded a bend, roaring down out of the north, and the driver hauled hard on the reins and reached for his shotgun at the same time. He was new, this driver, a man picked to replace the one who'd died in Abbottsville tonight from outlaw lead, and Cole said quickly, "This is no hold-up. You see no gun in my hand, do you? Let me aboard." Without waiting for a reply, Cole came out of his saddle, leaving the horse to find its way back to Abbottsville, and ran to the coach to clamber inside. The utter lack of menace in his attitude must have reassured the driver, for the man sent the stage lurching forward with a crack of his whip. There was only one lone passenger in this coach, and he filled a corner of a seat to fullness, for he was big, iron-gray Bill Abbott. "Cole," he exclaimed. "I thought it was you when I heard your voice, but I couldn't believe it. What in thunder are you doing here?" "Clearing a man's name," Cole said. "This stage will be stopped mighty soon. The man who'll stop it will be about Hellcat Joe Holloway's build, and he'll be riding Yempa's horse, but he won't be Yempa. Get your gun ready, Dad. But no matter what happens, don't climb out of this stage." "I don't know," Big Bill snorted. "What fetched you here and put you on the track of the truth, but any idiot knows that Hellcat Joe hasn't been behind the trouble on this range. That's what's bringing me down to the Triangle. Curtis has been writing me a lot of crazy nonsense about Hellcat going bronze. That makes us the only two people in the world who kept complete faith with Hellcat Joe, Cole told his father. Son, Big Bill said, his voice softer, it seems that there's a mighty lot that you and I have got to talk over. Maybe. But that was when the shot sounded, and the stage came to a bone-jolting stop, for a masked, slicker-clad figure, sitting the saddle of a dappled horse, had emerged from the bushes, a gun in his hand. And with the stage driver caught unawares and clawing at the sky, the masked man said, "You passengers, unload and empty your pockets." Cole Abbott came out of the stage, but he came with his gun in his hand and blazing, and his bullets were aimed not at the masked man but at the bushes behind the fellow, for that, Cole knew, was where the real menace lay. His fire raking the bushes, Cole saw Big Cyrus Lannister Jack-in-the-Box into view, a gun in his hand and a snarl on his face, and Lannister's lead ripped along Cole's thigh, bringing him to one knee. Beyond Lannister, Sheriff Bill Johnson was also exposing himself, shooting at the same time. But Cole concentrated on the ace-high owner, catching the man in his sights, and he saw Lannister take a stumbling step forward and then sprawl in a heap. But now there was a roar of rage behind Cole, and Big Bill Abbott was spilling from the stage, a gun in his hand. And Curtis Abbott, up there on the horse, took one startled look and wheeled Hasayampa's rearing, bullet-panicked mount, and began a fast gallop away. Now the tide was completely turned. Big Bill was making his gun count, and Sheriff Bill Johnson went down beneath the withering blast of it, but before he fell, the sheriff got a bullet into Cole, high in the shoulder. The stage driver, emboldened, had grasped his shotgun and was emptying it at the only target that was left. Curtis Abbott, flinging up his slicker-clad arms, was blown from his saddle. But now that there should have been silence, there was a new tumult, for a score of horsemen came thundering along the road from the south, and in that group was Hellcat Holloway, and townsmen from Abbottsville, those same men who'd taken Hellcat and Cole's trail, and Rose McCall was riding with them, too. When he saw her, Cole staggered toward Hellcat, who was spilling from his saddle, and gasped, "Curtis, up the road, dead. Quick, get that slicker and mask off him. Make up some cock-and-bull story about him sighting us. Rose mustn't know." Cole had meant it to be a whisper, intended only for Hellcat, but his voice seemed to be a roar in his own ears. Then he felt Hasayampa's hands upon him, but that was the last he knew, for he was falling into a deep, swirling darkness. And so Cole Abbott found himself in bed in Doc McCall's cottage when he came to consciousness, reeking of medicine and stiff with bandages. There was bright sunlight in the room, and he had to be told how the posse that had caught up with Hellcat Joe had had to listen to Yempa's story because Rose had ridden with the posse, and she was there to testify that Yempa had indeed been a prisoner in the Abbottsville jail's cellar at the very time others had ridden the oldster's horse. It was Rose who told Cole these things, and because her tale admitted a full knowledge of all that had happened, Cole said, "Then you know the truth about Curtis. I wanted to keep that from you. But it was Curtis' idea to frame Yempa in the first place. Curtis reaped what he sowed." "I know," she said and colored. "And I can see now what you were thinking. You were wrong, Cole. It was Big Bill Abbott I was trying to protect. You see, he's had a pride in his family, even in such remote members as Curtis Abbott. I didn't want Bill ever to find out that while Curtis was big, he was pretty weak stuff, so weak that he let himself be trimmed at the ace high. That's why I wanted those I.0 U.s destroyed. But Bill knows the truth now, too, and it hasn't mattered so very much." "Dad's here?" Cole questioned. "Him and Hellcat, they're both waiting to see you. And, Cole, Big Bill gave Father a check this morning, a check for twice the amount he paid Dad 24 years ago. Big Bill figures that he owes Dad for delivering him a man and a half into the family. And there's the running of the triangle waiting for you, if you want it." Cole smiled. "That would mean I'd be around a lot, Rose." She smiled, too, and colored again. "I'd like that fine, Cole," she said. "I'd like that just fine." The end.